You must remember that Revelation chapter 6 and verse 5 says that this certain he that is sitting on this black horse has a pair of balances in his hand. That's two balances. That totals a number of 4 trays. 2 trays in each balance. This also means that this certain he is holding a pair of balances in his hand that is also a metaphorical symbol. That means that this particular servant or archangel of Yahweh, Ben Yahweh, would have the power to judge Israel and Jacob under the law of both sides that constitutes Yahweh's law, that is on one side of the scale or river, and the law of Babylon or baby land, of which they dwell today, that is on this side of the scale or river. That is a simile of what is found printed in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, and verse 5, which reads, as quoted, "Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other 2, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river." End of quote. Now, this verse is not our subject and calls for an extensive erudition, actually an erudition, a great massive work of study of explaining this that we will testify to you of at a later time. However, we will share with you that this particular river that Daniel is describing here is being referred to in metaphor as well as allegorically and in simile as, quote, the Nile River, end of quote. And the, quote, there stood other 2, end of quote, that is found in this verse that's mentioned, is being referred to as the symbolic of 2 conditions of Judah, or Yehudah, the tribe that was taken captive, according to Jeremiah chapter 13 and verse 19, as well as the description that is found in Jeremiah chapter 14 and verse 2. That is, in 2 major tributaries, which are the White Nile and the Blue Nile. Now, the White Nile, or what Daniel is describing in this prophecy as, quote, this side of the bank of the river, end of quote, is longer and rises in the Great Lakes region of Central Africa, not the United States, Africa, where some of Judah was hiding after our exodus from Egypt over 3,000 years ago, and before going into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And on the other hand, on the other side, the Blue Nile is the source of where most of the water and fertile soil is found, of what Daniel is describing as, quote, the other on that side of the bank of the river, end of quote. Now, that is also a simile and allegory and a prophecy of Judah being taken captive into captivity, into slavery, the second time by way of ancient Egypt along the riverbanks in ships. That is confirmed in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28 and verse 68. So let's go read that. And that reads, quote, "And Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." End of quote. And now, here we are today in this country called the United States of America, on this side of the quote river, end of quote. The fulfillment, the absolute fulfillment of prophecy, living in this modern day land, which spiritually is called quote Sodom, end of quote, and quote Egypt, end of quote, where also our Lord Yahweh ben Yahweh was crucified by judicial murder in United States courts. That is, according to Revelation chapter 11 and verse 8. Read that and confirm that for yourself. That was prophecy. That was not a coincidence. In other words, Daniel chapter 12 and verse 5 is also a direct connection to Revelation chapter 6 and verses 5 and 6. This includes one part which is being referred to as, quote, one measure of wheat, end of quote. That has absolutely nothing to do today with a dearth or a food shortage or some type of mark of the beast issue where there's no food, as many of the false prophets and those who can all of a sudden see with their eyes closed has professed it to be, causing the people of earth to err, E-R-R. That measure of wheat that is spoken of in Revelation chapter 6 verse 6, that measure of quote wheat, end of quote. Hear this so you can get it right. Are all those whose foreheads were sealed with their father's name, Yahweh, written in their foreheads. And that is according to Revelation chapter 14 and verse 1. I hope you were not only listening to what I just confirmed for you, but I hope you heard what was said. Keeping in mind that, quote, wheat, spelled W-H-E-A-T, end of quote. We eat. Before, in its English form, before it was ready to be converted, was spelled with a different original Hebrew idiom. However, we will reveal that to you shortly. Meanwhile, this wheat is a metaphor as well as symbolic. Because what you may be failing to remember, which you mustn't forget, is that before wheat is ready to be cultivated or to be harvested by the harvesters, wheat is green in color. Those back then, speaking of talking about the book of Exodus with Moses, Moshe, They represented the green harvest. It wasn't time yet. It just simply was not time yet for them to be harvested. That's why, among many reasons, they had to pay their ransom of 10 giras. Wheat is also known as a key factor enabling the emergence of city-based societies at the start of civilization, because it was one of the first crops that could be easily cultivated on a large scale. This is history. And therefore, it had the additional advantage of yielding a harvest that provides long-term storage of food. In fact, for the sake of historics, based on historics and agriculturally, wheat contributed to the emergence of cities and the states in the Fertile Crescent thousands of years ago, including the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. This means that, speaking of back in the days of ancient days, wheat grain is or was considered a staple food used to make flour for leavened bread. It all ties in when you study with the veil removed from off of your mind and your heart. Why? How is that? Because this means that those, quote, green wheat, the green wheat, end of quote, which represent the green souls who were in Exodus with Moshe, represents this brown wheat, B-R-O-W-N, that is found today in the book of Revelation, chapter 6 and verse 6, that was preserved to make bread today. Give us this day, Yahweh, our daily bread. The wheat of Revelation today, at one time, and some still are, lying flat. That's F-L-A-T, flat, like a flat brick, flat tire, can't roll, can't go anywhere, lying flat on their backs, with no leaven in their minds, just as they were with Moses of Exodus. Remember? The green wheat, they haven't even been harvested yet, but they too were lying flat. They were all bound to Yahweh's spirit of deep sleep, as they are today. That is according to Isaiah chapter 29 that we read earlier, verses 10 through 18. They were all sealed until the last day, which is now, during this era, this generation, when their minds would be experiencing, they would experience the coming of their yeast. They would be agitated with yeast. They would meet their yeast. They would be taught by their yeast. They would have to experience yeast before they can be baked that would make them rise.